We're really honored to have three speakers today. CG Pradhan, please come forward. So this is our lunchtime keynotes, which will try to anchor and set the stage for our afternoon sessions. We're going to begin with the wonderful keynote lecture from Professor Vikram Patel. Vikram is the Paul Farmer Professor and Chair of Global Health and Social Medicine at Harvard's Department of Global Health and Social Medicine at the medical school. He co-leads the Global Mental Health at Harvard initiative. If you look at the bio, he has a long list of accomplishments and has done some incredible work both in India and in the US, and it's a real honor that he's joining us to talk about reimagining India's healthcare. And this actually connects with questions that were asked in the economy session. So many of our sessions are really wonderfully connected. Our second keynote will be from Dr. Pramod Verma, who is the chief architect of India's Aadhaar system. And so he'll be talking in the second hour. And then it's truly our honor to welcome Consul General of India at New York City, Binay Pradhan, who's right over here, and he'll give us a 10-minute overview of the Indian diaspora and linkages to India. So let's get started by welcoming Dr. Vikram Patel. Please give him a wonderful hand.
It's gone through.
Thank you, Anu. You already sort of did a review of my lecture before you even heard it, but I'm glad. I hope it's going to be as wonderful as she promised. So my talk is really about one of the most important issues that faces India today, and that's the health of its people. With 1.5 billion people, give or take a few, we're already the most populous nation in the world. We already have the largest youth population in the world, and we will soon have the largest number of older adults in the world. And so the health of the people of India isn't just important for the economy of India, but in fact it's central to the future of our planet altogether. Now, the government of India, as I'm sure many of you have already heard, has announced that we will be a developed country within 100 years from our independence. And so it is important to acknowledge that the health of the people of a nation is central to the notion of sustainable development. And indeed, every developed country in the world has far better health indicators than India, but most importantly, with one singular exception, every developed country in the world has adopted universal health coverage as its mantra for health of its people. No surprises, no prizes for guessing which is that one country which has completely and totally failed its people when it comes to universal health care. And my single message to all of us here today is if there is one country that India should not emulate, it is the one that we are currently in right now. Now, in December 2020, the Lancet Journal commissioned many of us, Tarun and I, amongst the co-chairs, along with Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw, to prepare a report for the Lancet. Remember, this was right in the beginning of what was a devastating pandemic around the world, to prepare a kind of a blueprint on how we could reimagine India's healthcare system. The goal of the commission, and I'm going to read from our commentary, was to realize a resilient health system that offered comprehensive, accountable, accessible, inclusive, and affordable care to all the citizens of India. This is a very ambitious set, an aspirational set of goals. Now, I guess some of you are not universal health coverage folks, so I'm just going to explain to you briefly what universal health coverage is. This is a concept that has been coined by the World Health Organization, and it covers 4 key guiding principles. First of all, that universal health coverage, by its very definition, universal, implies coverage for all health conditions. Second, that it implies coverage for all people in the population. Third, that it is going to provide health care with zero financial risk to the individual. And fourth, that it is going to provide health care that covers the full range of needs of the individual, not just curative care, but also care that goes beyond. And of course, as the population ages, it isn't curative care alone that is going to dominate the healthcare needs of people, but long-term care. Many of us in this room, for example, are probably exemplars of that kind of long-term care that the healthcare system needs to deal with. But in addition to these technical principles, the Commission also abided to a very important declaration that was made in Astana in 2018. And again, I'm going to quote directly from that declaration, that the primary role for the healthcare of the people of a country is the government. The government plays a central primary role as a steward to promote and protect the right of everyone to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of health. This is a very fundamental and important point, which we'll return to a little later. Now, the Commission also styled itself as a citizens' commission, and people have often asked us, what does that actually mean? It means quite simply that rather than a technocratic exercise that has dominated 75 years of planning around the healthcare system, we wanted to actually provide recommendations that were seen through the prism of the person using the healthcare system, to be informed by the experiences, the expectations, the aspirations, and preferences of people in India. In other words, the lived experience of the average citizen. And in order to do this, we decided, many of the previous reports on healthcare in India have really been quite ideologically siloed. And so we decided right at the outset that this commission would bring together the diverse voices that constitutes India's healthcare system, for example, different traditions of medicine, the very large private sector, civil society, etc. But in addition, we also sought to go out and collect information directly from people. And so we commissioned two very significant studies. One is called the district study, in which 6 districts of India were involved in deep ethnographies of the whole range of health workers. India also has a very plural health workforce. And the second was a citizen household survey. 50,000 randomly selected households from across the country were visited and surveyed on a range of questions about aspirations, preferences, and attitudes. Now, just a brief word of history. Is universal health coverage something new? No, it isn't. Actually, the notion of universal health coverage was embraced by the first founding government of India, in fact, even before independence, in 1946, when the British were still the masters of the country, through the Bhore Committee report. The Bhore Committee report, ironically, was produced exactly at the same time as Britain was also undergoing a restructuring of its own healthcare system, which looked exactly like India's in the 1930s and 40s. But whereas Britain adopted the Bevan report and created the national health system, which today is considered to be one of the world's best examples of universal health coverage, unfortunately, because India was pretty broke at the time of independence, all the major recommendations of the Bhore Committee report were shelved. And what really emerged then was a very bleakly financed government system that was dominated by physician specialists and hospitals. Over the next couple of decades, we saw the emergence of a lot of vertical programs. Instead of focusing on comprehensive healthcare system building, the government only had money to build programs in vertical silos on specific areas. The most vivid example, of course, was family planning, the very first vertical program in 1952. And then there were a number of other disease-specific programs, most recently culminating in the AIDS control program, which, of course, has to be said, has been one of India's great success stories in health. But a major shift happened in 1976, when India adopted the Primary Healthcare Declaration at Alma Ata. This was a very important historical moment in the evolution of India's healthcare policy. Because for the first time, the government acknowledged that it wasn't the hospital where healthcare took place. It was the primary healthcare center, a notion that was about healthcare close to where people lived. And it also called, quite dramatically, for the active engagement of the community, shifting power, as it were, at least on paper, from the physician in the hospital to the community and primary healthcare. Alas, again, fiscal constraints, but also the influence of very influential global institutions, read certain banks not very far from here, the government ultimately continued to prioritize a very narrow vision of selective primary healthcare rather than comprehensive healthcare. The situation got a lot worse when India went truly broke in the early 90s and the imposition of the IMF conditionalities on budget allocation, which meant a further downgrading of the public investments in healthcare due to these external forces, and alongside that, the dramatic unregulated growth of the private sector in every aspect of healthcare, from delivery through to medical education. This was also the moment of introducing perhaps one of the most regressive forms of healthcare financing, which is indemnity insurance models. We can see the consequences of that in the US. And of course, India also has now got an insurance system that instead of covering people, it's covering disease delivery of care by hospitals. And as a consequence, also, there was a gradual marginalization of the state as the primary provider. There have been two very important positive developments in the last 20 years. The first was the emergence of the National Rural Health Mission. This has been transformative. If today India can boast that its infant and maternal mortality rates have plummeted, that has largely been driven through the National Rural Health Mission's focus on community health workers supporting maternal health care, and also, it has to be said, through the improvements of living conditions for people in India, particularly women's empowerment. And the second very important development has been in the last 5 years, since the National Health Policy in 2017 embraced the idea of health for all. And today we see a very important progressive idealization of that. 2/3 of state funding for health is going to primary health care, something which is really remarkable and quite rare in the developing world. And there have been a slew of very visionary new policies. The PMJ, I think, is very visionary. There are, of course, flaws in the way that it's been designed and implemented, but on paper, it is a truly visionary policy. The notion of trying to bring traditional medicine into the same league as biomedicine is another visionary policy. And the emergence of an entire new sector of healthcare with its own cadre, the Health and Wellness Center, has also been remarkable, and we already see early signs of how these health and wellness centers are bringing healthcare close to people's own homes. So what did the Commission do? We did a lot of analysis. I'm not going to bore you with all of them. Also, in the interest of time, I'm just going to tell you a brief snapshot of what is going to be described in much more detail by the end of this year or early next year. In current status of health, India is doing extremely well. It's on target to meet many of the Millennium Development Goal targets. We'll hear later on, I believe, about infant mortality and life expectancy, but life expectancy has doubled in the last 50 years. Sadly, we still have a lower life expectancy than our neighbors, including, surprisingly, Bangladesh. But nevertheless, it is an improvement for a very large country with huge inequities. Unfortunately, one area of health remains largely neglected, and that's non-communicable diseases. This is, of course, the conditions that will kill most of us. That is to do with conditions like diabetes, kidney disease, and so on, and of course, mental health problems, a particular interest of mine. The National Mental Health Survey of India, which is a Government of India study, reported that there are about 100 million Indians living currently with a significant, clinically diagnosable mental disorder, of whom 90% received no care at all from the health system. There are, of course, emerging challenges. We've seen COVID-19, but in addition to that, let's not forget antimicrobial resistance. India, sadly, is a country where some of the most drug-resistant microbes are emerging, to a large extent because of the irrational use of antibiotics. And finally, I know someone else is going to speak on it, so I won't say much more, but this is true of all countries in the world. India is not an exception. Inequities. This country is a great example of health inequities. In spite of spending so much more, India is not an exception. We have huge inequities in health outcomes, both geographic and class-based. So all of us are grappling with why. What is the reason for this? Well, first of all, it's important to recognize the success in one big area, and that is access to healthcare. 75 years ago, most Indians could not access healthcare. Today, as our household survey showed, 96% of the households that we surveyed had accessed either in or outpatient care in the previous year in person. And with the advent of digital technologies, it's shocking, but 70% of Indians reported that they were using the internet for information about healthcare. Sadly, though, again, this healthcare access is flawed in three very important ways. First of all, it doesn't cover everything. In fact, it covers very few things, particularly the public system. As I mentioned earlier, healthcare access is not, in fact, covering most non-communicable diseases. Secondly, that healthcare, even once you access it, is of abysmal quality. Let me actually give you a couple of startling numbers that will be reported in more detail in the Commission. There are now estimates that 1.6 million people will die in India each year because of poor quality care. This is twice the number of people who die because they couldn't access care. Let me frame this in another way. More people are going to die because of the bad care they receive when they go to the doctor, rather than not going to the doctor at all. Try to figure that one out. The India Health System Project actually has some more shocking figures. This was a large study, a deep study in one state of India, looking at using vignette-based, asking doctors, to diagnose the vignette and prescribe treatments. Here's a shocking figure. They were using vignettes such as, for example, for TB, childhood diarrhea, heart attacks, and asthma, pretty common health conditions. Only 2% of providers actually prescribe the correct treatment. 40% of providers prescribe only incorrect, unnecessary, or irrational drugs. These are actually everyday experiences. For any of you who actually live in India and use the medical care system, particularly the private system, it is not uncommon to walk out with a prescription list that's as long as your forearm, and most of those will be branded drugs of completely non-effective nature. The third important problem is that most of the most essential things that people need when they're sick, the drugs and the diagnostics, are actually not available in the public system. And as a consequence, drugs and diagnostics are driving out-of-pocket costs. The Citizen Survey shows, and we're just one more, that there's a lot of other research that backs this up, is that roughly 75% of every rupee spent on healthcare out of pocket is spent on medicines and and diagnostics. About 50% is spent on medicines alone, and the vast majority of those medicines are irrational. You can see potentials for fixing this problem here right away, right? Because these are completely fixable problems. Out-of-pocket expenses, as a consequence, remain very high. Unfortunately, they have fallen, it has to be said, but still 50% of all health expenditure in India is out-of-pocket. That's way too more than any progressive healthcare system should accept. And still, 10% of households in India were driven into poverty last year because of healthcare expenses. Healthcare, unlike in most countries, which is considered to be a route out of poverty, in India, it now overtakes. What do you think the lead cause of poverty in India is? Just to get a guess. What do you think is the single most common cause of poverty before healthcare overtook it? Is marriage. Think about that. We've had a very important marriage. We know, I kid you not. I know the marriage in Jamnagar did not impoverish the parents, but for the average Indian, marriage is, it does impoverish people, but healthcare has overtaken that. So, let me turn to the end. What are the structural factors that the Commission has to address? The first is that, I've said this before, but it bears saying again, healthcare services are too focused on cures of diseases by doctors and drugs rather than actually the needs that the person has when they come into the clinic. So the healthcare system is designed around doctors and hospitals rather than people in the communities and their health needs. The healthcare system is utterly fragmented. So even though we have no shortage of doctors, we have no shortage of health workers as a pool, they actually don't talk to each other, they don't coordinate with each other. Provider incentives are typically not encouraging high quality care. The public system, I've already told you, is inadequate in many ways that drives a lot of people into the private care system, which is of course completely and totally unregulated. Even though the state has made many efforts to regulate both the public and the private sector, but particularly the private sector. Let me give you one example. The Clinical Establishment Act was passed in 2010. The goal was to really regulate the quality of care that nursing homes and hospitals provided. Thanks to the very, very powerful pushback of medical lobbies, the Clinical Establishment Act has not been implemented in most states in India, and even where it is implemented, it is simply not enforceable. So I'm going to end with where the Commission is heading in terms of thinking about where India's healthcare system needs to go. There's no question that this is not going to be fixed through a little bit here and a little bit there and a little bit there. It's going to require a systemic culture change in the way we think about healthcare, not just for Indians. I think this might be true for all parts of the world. But nevertheless, let's just focus on India. So we identify 7 paradigm shifts, and then I'm going to stop. 8 paradigm shifts, and then I'm going to end. The first is a shift from a narrow, biomedical, reactive, and siloed approach to disease control towards a genuine person-centered health system that is designed to meet people where they are and to support my dear colleague who's no more with us, Paul Farmer, used the beautiful concept of accompaniment. A health system that is designed to accompany people on their road to recovery rather than treat them as disease episodes as and when they fall sick. Second, to move from a focus on access, which I think was a very important focus in 1947, but I think in 2024, that is not the focus. The focus has to shift to quality. Quality that is determined by the competencies of the providers and value-based financing of healthcare. Third, to ensure that publicly financed and delivered health services are not only for the poor. Any system that has a separation for things for the poor and things for the rich is always going to be a system where the public system is going to be downgraded. This has to be a system where you and I feel comfortable to actually access care when we fall sick, because only then will the system actually deliver higher quality care for everyone. Fourth, to shift from what is unfortunately still a very centralized form of governance of the healthcare system. On paper, you read that the government wants to decentralize, but yet everything is done at the center or the state level. There is really no genuine decentralization. You know, the average size of a district in India is 2 to 3 million people. Every district is epidemiologically a distinct unit with different socio-demographic characteristics of the population, geographic characteristics, and disease profiles. And so planning really does need to be decentralized with empowerment of district-level leadership. And for this, you need the fourth important point, which is data. Today's Lancet carries a leader which is well worth reading, because what it really focuses on is how India's healthcare system is really being planned without real-time data. And this is true, for example, during the pandemic as well. And this is, of course, where technology-enabled data and information systems are going to be extremely important. Fifth, we need to treat citizens not as passive beneficiaries of the charity of the state, but actually as active, engaged users with fundamental rights to healthcare. And I use the word right very deliberately, because the right to healthcare is actually enshrined in our Constitution. It has never been fully realized in law and practice, but it is, in fact, in the Constitution. And some states of India, Rajasthan as one example, have already implemented a Right to Health Act. Sixth, to prioritize provider competencies and to embrace the diversity of our providers. Isn't it amazing that India still thinks that every health center should be run by an allopathic doctor, when even in the US today, with 100 times more doctors than India, a third of all primary care practices are run by nurses. And I think we do need to break away from this doctor-centric, doctor-controlled model to recognize that other healthcare providers like nurse practitioners can play a fundamentally important role in equity-based healthcare. In fact, I often tell my medical colleagues in India that let us not pretend that we as doctors were responsible for the reduction in infant and maternal mortality. That is not true. The dramatic reductions in maternal infant mortality have happened primarily because of women's empowerment, education, and other social determinants of health. But if we had to look at healthcare delivery, it came at the hands of the ASHA, the humblest, the least powerful, and yet the most effective single person in India's workforce, who sadly is still considered a volunteer working on incentives rather than a fully salaried person in the health system. And finally, we need to move from an implicit expectation that the government is going to steward the healthcare system, and by the healthcare system, I mean the deeply fragmented healthcare system of India, to an explicit acknowledgement that the government has to regulate, not just the public sector. It has to fully regulate the private sector by outlining mandatory roles of the private sector for it to be allowed to function, because so much of the out-of-pocket expenditure is currently being driven by irrational care, unaccountable care, poor quality care in the private sector. So I want to end by saying this is really a historic opportunity for us to actually realize this ambitious vision. Let's not forget other low and middle income. People often argue with us and say, India's too poor. No, it isn't. That is not the case any longer. Or that India is too, it's a developing country. Well, Thailand is a developing country. Brazil is a developing country. There are many developing countries out there that are serving as role models. We don't need to look to Europe for our inspiration. And I would say that many states in India are also emerging as absolute outstanding examples of a universal healthcare system. I won't give names, but there are many states. So I will end with a couple of opportunities that I want to leave you with. First of all, the Citizen Survey and a couple of other surveys show something pretty dramatic has happened in the pandemic. This is something that will perhaps change the conversation, the narrative on the role of the public sector. Up until 2020, there was a sense that people were migrating in droves away from the public sector to the private sector. That has reversed. For the first time, we are seeing a return in large numbers to the public sector, both for outpatient, but especially for inpatient care. And this is largely being driven, we think, by two forces. First of all, the trust in the government sector because of the pandemic. All vaccination was delivered through the government sector. And a lot of the private sector simply shut down or abandoned people during the pandemic. And secondly, the massive growth in the investment in a primary care-based system. The Health and Wellness Center, I think, is a good example of that. This is incredible. We're actually seeing a return of people to the public system. What an important time for us to invest in that system. Secondly, Nachiket Moore, one of our commissioners, and his group of colleagues have done a very detailed costing of how much does it cost to really get this kind of vision of UHC out per capita into our population, the whole comprehensive care. And it turns out that at least 4 states in India have already reached that limit, which means that from a fiscal perspective, it is not unrealistic any longer for us to actually achieve universal health coverage. You might ask, well, why have we not reached it? It's because, of course, of inefficient spending of that money. Third, health has become an electoral issue. 2 of the political parties that have announced their manifestos for the upcoming Lok Sabha elections, if you read them, you'll see health as one of the most prominent agendas of these 2 parties. And I'm pretty sure the others who will publish their manifestos in the months ahead will also do so. I live half the year in India. I always see, every state government, are they using our taxpayer money? Of course, have these full-page ads on how wonderful they are, etc. If you look at all their achievements, you will see that health achievements are almost always at the top of the list. How many hospitals have been opened, how many ICUs have been opened, etc. Health has become a very important electoral subject. And in the Citizen Survey, we found that 65% of the households we surveyed said they would expect their elected representatives to be held accountable for the health care that they received. And finally, India is at the cusp of a technological revolution. I'm so glad the next speaker will speak about one of those technological revolutions. But I think Aadhaar has only set the stage for what I think is probably the world's most ambitious health technology revolution, which is the Ayushman Bharat digital mission. If the ABDM achieves what it is slated to achieve, I think it would be the most transformative opportunity for us to reimagine India's healthcare system. So what would that healthcare system look like? Well, I'm not going to tell you that, but instead I'm going to say is watch out for the publication of the commission. It will be published in the Lancet, maybe the end of this year, early next year, and I hope you will all read it and send us your comments and suggestions then. So thank you very much.
So while we switch over to the next keynote, this was just brilliant. Thank you so much for both talking about the history of the healthcare system in India and how India achieved high levels of access, to discussing quality. So because of the back-to-back keynotes, we are not going to have a Q&A. What we're going to do is bring up Dr. Pramod Verma to talk about the Aadhaar and the innovations with digital infrastructure. We'll have comments from Consul General, and then we will actually stop for a group photograph before we move to the next session on inclusion. So I just wanted to draw some connections. So Vikram mentioned that inequities are there in every country, and the session that follows is going to explore some of those health inequities. The other connection I want to draw to the other sessions is that we are looking at non-communicable diseases, which are now on the rise, and there's a lot of connection between food and nutrition systems, urban infrastructure, walkable cities, and so that's coming up in the sustainability session. There's climate risks, extreme heat, water shortages, and so there are tremendous amounts of linkages. But I also wanted to emphasize what he talked about, connecting us backwards to what we saw this morning. There's politics, health. I mean, you made that point very clear. But also that healthcare is so closely related to precarity. I mean, I didn't know the marriage was the first, or healthcare superseded marriage. So I think you've given us all these nuggets that are going to stay in our mind. And I thought the other stunning statistic was that 90% of mental illness does not get any support. And so the one follow-up question that we could take for tomorrow would be on education. And what is the potential to create healthcare workers? And you mentioned that nurses and it's not only doctors, but the whole spectrum of healthcare workers. And how might that square with, are our young people trained to take up jobs in healthcare? So these are questions where, as we move into the inclusion panel, I promise we'll bring forth everybody in the inclusion panel, Dr. Patel and Dr. Verma, to have those discussions. So with that, we're going to switch to the next keynote, which is on India's digital public infrastructure journey. The format of this is going to be a talk by Dr. Pramod Verma of Ek Step. He's the CTO of the Aadhaar card and many of these digital innovations. And we'll, just like I had offered brief reflections, we'll have Akash Kapoor, who is over there, who's a Princeton visiting lecturer teaching a class on innovations in digital infrastructure, who'll just offer a conversation or a brief conversation so we take away some key points. So with that, are you guys ready to go?
I am.
Okay. Well, I won't say anything about technology. So
We can get slides up and running. So we can crack much harder puzzle.
Okay.
Projection is the hardest part, I think.
Yeah.
In navigation.
So maybe I'll just make a couple of other comments. We heard about. So, go ahead.
Can I make a comment on?
Absolutely. You want to take a microphone?
I just had one.
You to turn it on.
So just one supplementary thought that I think would be interested, because we spoke a lot about fragmentation of India's polity, excess centralization and inadequate decentralization in a variety of, these mics are amazing. In a variety of contexts. And I think the commission that Vikram was just alluding to, Vikram, I remember one of the opening meetings, one of the ground rules of the commission, and I just want to mention it for consideration, was that in our view, the schisms in discussion that had bedeviled all the past discussions of trying to achieve universal health care, going back to the Bhore Commission, and several others since then, because everybody has wanted to do universal health care for a long time. But for instance, Ayush doctors were marginalized. The private sector was deemed essentially persona non grata. and ruled out, even though the bulk of the care was being given by the private sector, badly in many instances, it turns out. But they were not even on the table. And you can imagine that as technology takes over, you would have the technophobes and the technophiles. And so I think one of the things why I'm sort of very encouraged at the end of 4 years, going on our 5th year now, with so many institutions, 20, 25 institutions, couple hundred researchers, is that I think we've managed to create that culture where people with extremely different points of views are able to sit across the table and have civil discourse of some sort. Not agree all the time, and we've had a couple of folks leave in a huff. But be that as it may, that's the only way to get this conversation going. So that's the reason why I feel a little bit optimistic about potentially coming up with not just a conceptually sound, but a potentially implementable plan over a 10-year period. So I just wanted to leave that for you.
So thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're going to hand off to Dr. Pramod Verma to tell us about India's digital public infrastructure journey. Welcome to Princeton.
No, thank you. Thank you for having me here. This is the first time here. So I normally don't show up to this part of the world, but fantastic. Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for inviting me. I think it's okay, right? So on. Yeah. So I'm a technologist, computer scientist, and I'm an optimist. So if nothing else, I'll die smiling, happy. But I think India's digital infrastructure journey has been audacious and reasonably successful. I think even more important than one success, India, from different parts, different leaders in India, managed to do a series of them. And I think that shows a very different way to bring that belief of that we can do and so on. And much of what we are doing, remember, before I go down and you have all the negative thoughts in your head or whatever, I want to say this, is that digital public infrastructure is quite no different from physical infrastructure. It is a necessary thing to do, not sufficient. Remember, DPI is necessary but not sufficient. You have to do much more on top of that to make sure everything is balanced out and equity is played out, inclusion is played out. It's not a de facto. But you can design well, and you can increase the access. I think the access vector increase is one of the biggest takeaway from this. So let me run through this fast. Maybe I'll try to really run, okay? So because much of this text, I'm not sure how interesting it is for you. So this is the stats, right? In 2009 is when I quit my private sector journey. I was in Boston, startups, back in India, doing stuff, and then you read newspaper and then decide to quit volunteer stuff. And I didn't realize the stats that we had less than 20% of Indians banking. And 20% of India was banking. At the same time, we were also, in 2009, we had $50 billion US, then 2.5% of this GDP, 80% of the budget, annual budget going down as subsidies. And it was obviously, you can imagine, if nobody has bank accounts, nobody has an identity, and 50 billion is going down, very, very high chance half of that at least would get taken away by middlemen or most powerful, because the asymmetry in the supply chain of that money, right? But this is a study from 2020, December, from Bureau of International Settlements in Basel. So when they studied India's financial inclusion journey, something very interesting occurred to them. One is that India, according to them, India would have taken 5 decades, 50 years, for moving from sub 20% banking penetration to above 80. But India surprisingly took 7.5 years. So the compression of a development cycle was very surprising to them, and said what was the cause of that and what would have triggered that, right? So this compression, 2060, we would have been still opening bank account otherwise. Remember, I mean, it would have been a terrible thing to do when, AGI would have taken over the world or whatever, according to Silicon Valley anyway. So we would have been still opening bank account. It didn't make any sense. Now, but India compressed this. And Magic just stopped. Okay, maybe. Oh, that's interesting.
Okay, now try.
Okay. India also managed to, this is very interesting. In the two reasons why Aadhaar, and somebody was asking this question, was Aadhaar an identity project or it was a financial inclusion project? And the purpose of Aadhaar, the grand purpose behind it was that we need to get everybody into the financial formalization, formal system, financial system, and also clean up our subsidy regime. Because we were not going to stop the subsidies, we are only increasing the subsidy. We talked about NREGA or scholarship or cooking gas, which most of the middle class know, subsidies and so on. So given these two, but the way India did was not by solving them, but creating the underlying building blocks. And that allowed not only that to get solved, but many other things to get solved. And one of them is our largest G2P, government to person payment infrastructure. So if you want to talk about UBI or anything else like that, India is peculiarly set up for it to do. We have 900 million people, unique people who are attached to their bank account who can receive money instantly for 1/700th of a dollar cost. That's the cost of sending money in India. And 1,300 programs. So 300 federal programs and about 1,000 odd state programs have now sending money. And the beauty of this thing was that two things happened, is that because of the bank account were opened through, not only, even Congress, by the way, they started, pre-government also started opening bank account, then it was called no-frill bank account, and subsequently post-2014, there was a political program called Jan Dhan, and that actually pushed further. 510 million new accounts were opened. Out of that, 60% was women. So two things happened in gender parity, much to do in gender parity. We have to wait. But definitely on connection, internet connection, we are on par. Women are on par with men, and smartphone. Smartphone not yet, but internet connection access. For bank account access, it's on par, completely on par right now. That allowed the transfer of much of a social subsidy to women. Remember, that is, I think, something very interesting that happened as a side effect, that instead of sending money physically to men, that created interesting side effect of its own, right? And this started with Aadhaar, which started in 2010, but today, how did it be? Okay, yeah, 1.39 billion, I think it's about 1.4 now, Aadhaar. So pretty much everyone. The digital identity, it's not a card, it's not citizenship. I had a discussion yesterday. Aadhaar was one of the unique programs around the world that had an identity attached to zero entitlement. So identity, it gave identity with no benefit whatsoever, zero benefit. In fact, the ID card didn't even look good. My father was disappointed. That's it. I became an chief architect and gave him a plastic, laminated, bad-looking photo. He said, "Really? This is what you went and did?" I said, "Okay, whatever. We'll figure it out later. Okay, get used to it. It's okay." Yeah, but the reason why I think it was one of the designed as just to make identity verifiable again and again. It says who you claim to be. Aadhaar is just about who you claim to be, not even who you are. Remember, that means you can claim your name, claim your address, get an attestation, biometrically unique attestation, and that becomes your starting point. And that simplicity of that system was so beautiful that people miss out that part of it. It had 4 attributes, 2 APIs, application programming interface, but we do that repeatedly, 60 million times every day. So it was very powerful. We also opened up our telecom through an induction of Jio, so-called Jio effect in India, because they managed to build their own 4G stack. Because by 4G, software was eating the world, in the telecom as well. So 4G stack was fully, software-driven heavily, and 5G is even more software-driven. So people are able to actually do this dependency on hardware-driven telecom, shift to software. Jio did a brilliant job, collapsed the cost. Indians moved from 1 GB per capita data consumption per month to 1 GB a day. Indians spend, don't ask me what they do with it. We banned TikTok, so probably watching YouTube. I think, guys, that's what probably doing. But nevertheless, you ask the question, can you not do it? It's an interesting way to ask the question. Don't ask me, what is the use of this internet? That's for us to figure it out. And now, as we do healthcare and everything else, we have to figure it out. Can we afford not to give identity to people? Can we afford not to have bank account and financial access to people? Can we afford not to have connectivity and mobile phone access to people? And the answer is pretty much no. But what will they do with it? How will they do it? Will they do right? Or will be a bunch of WhatsApp deep fake news and all the junk? For us to figure it out, how this would navigate itself. Very little talked about. Very little. Europe is implementing thick and fast, called verifiable credential. Credentialing hits at the heart of access. Accessing any products or service. Why do we have, we talked about GDP to lending ratio. Korea went up like crazy, and we are at 58% or whatever, right? SMEs can't get lending. Nobody can get money from a formal system, and they go to a money lender, informal. Why? Why do people go to an informal system? It's not because formal system doesn't want to deal with it. It's simply not cost viable to do it. So we never managed to get banks to go to villages. So that's one thing I want to put out this. I'm a technologist, okay, remember, so take it with a pinch of salt. Don't worry about it. But nevertheless, we believe if you keep arguing for primary care, we need to open more schools and have better teachers, it's wrong in my mind. You'll never get to that answer. We never managed to open bank account in 600,000 or 700,000 villages. But we got banking to it. So focus on the verb. Don't focus on the noun. And this is a learning that we have. Is that get banking, get healthcare, not get doctors. Why would a doctor go and sit in rural environment when your children want to be studied in better schools and so on? You can only push so many people. So I think focus on the verb. I think technology has a brilliant way to bridge that gap of remotely and digitally providing the verbs, still with the quality of care and everything else we can talk about. And this is one of those things that DigiLocker, which started in 2015, has managed. You know what the cost of DigiLocker so far has been? $8 million. $8 million US. We have 250 million users, 6.5 billion verifiable credentials. My licenses, my academics, and my daughter's academic 10th grade certificates are all digitally verifiable. Why is it important? Because for white collar, we don't see this. For blue collar and gray collar, when I walk in and make a claim that I am 10th class graduate or a graduate, I worked in Uber for 5 years and I am a 4.95 rating, and I make these claims, there's no way for the counterparty to verify the claim. And when counterparties can't verify the claim, you are in a perpetually low performance equilibrium. Low trust, high cost equilibrium. And that's what we are shifting. We are shifting, saying that claim should be verifiable. Now, what will they do with it? We don't know yet. But the minimum thing you can ask is that if I claim I worked in this company, proof of work, proof of earning, proof of association, proof of skill, and proof of reputation should be portable and verifiable. Keep that in mind. Otherwise, we will never crack the cost conundrum in India, and it's not viable for anybody to do any business with poor people. And then we'll have a government-free stuff Vikram was talking about, another highway we build for poor people, and then all those rich people stay on the side, which never works. Right? So UPI, Then we started UPI. So UPI we started architecting in 2014, and we took a year to write 1.5 pages, and actually UPI protocol. I'm very proud of it because we wrote literally distilled payment to 1.5 pages. And that 1.5 pages started in 2015 as a pilot. Last month we did 13.5 billion transactions. To compare, that's MasterCard worldwide volume, okay, roughly. So it's very, very powerful imagination. And this is why has it happened again? Look at the numbers in India. Pre-2016, we had less than 50 million people doing digital payments. 22 million credit cards. 22 million people, 23 million people in the capital market, mutual fund, all. Where are the rest of the people? Because it's simply not affordable, accessible, or cost effective for a mutual fund broker to sell mutual fund to a driver. It makes no sense for them to sell because SEBI, our capital market regulator, had a cost of 1,500 rupees, which is about $20, for just doing know your customer. And they get 50 bips, 0.5% commission. That means somebody has to write a 300,000 rupee check just for me to recover the cost of onboarding you. How many people can write 300,000 check? 22 million. So we were capped. Our capital market, nobody could enter the market beyond 22 million people. 22 million credit cards, less than 35 million people digital payments. With UPI, last year we reached 500 million people doing digital payments. Right? It's this non-linear growth, expansion of the pie. If you don't cut the cost, increase the trust, and expand the pie, you will always have this 10% of the people like us, who have everything, and everybody else living whatever they want to live, right? Informal money lender, informal health, informal everything. Absolutely two things we address through DPI is cost, dramatic reduction of cost, while increasing the trust. If you can do that repeatedly, I think one vector opens up beautifully. And interestingly, less known fact, I'm pretty sure you didn't know, many of you didn't know, is that the same UPI is used by feature phone users, not only smartphone users, using voice, and the same UPI, 300 million times every month, is used by people who have no phones. Indian Post Office man or a banking correspondence come in front of their door, and they can use a fingerprint to actually transact. I am my card, and my fingerprint is my PIN, right? With literally low-cost money transfer going on, 300 million transactions. Same UPI, by the way. So you can create an inclusive infrastructure and still drive innovation on top of that, because diversity of India necessitates innovation, not uniformity, right? We need diverse solutions as well. Interestingly, business also got automated. GST, we talked about it. Painfully, we rewrote and rebuilt. And I was architect of GST as well. But for us, the best part was, very surprisingly, I don't know how Indian government even decided this. Maybe they didn't know. Bureaucrats didn't know. I don't know what happened. GST, we made a very interesting decision that GST will deal only with machine-readable e-invoices and e-way bills. It's very hard to make that call. I'll tell you why. You're so tempted politically because you are disrupting, and it's a political vote bank you are disrupting. So you don't want to make their life hard. So very much you would have allowed, no, upload your invoice, scanned invoice, whatever you want to do. We did not do. And you know what the power of that is, that entire business and SMEs, small, medium businesses, digital footprints, forget tax payment, digital footprint became verifiable. And why is that digital footprint becoming verifiable? Is that because now India, under the DPDP Act, our own version of GDPR, is giving the right to own and right to share your own data, in addition to right to be protected. Right? So this is beautiful. This suddenly allows, and Nandan made that 2016 seminal talk saying that Indians will be economically data rich before they are economically rich. Because we are all digitally footprint, everybody is doing, transacting, gig work, this work. But if you can't harness your own digital footprint and to create a virtuous cycle for yourself, to believe that I'm a good person, good employee, or good service person, how can you push yourself forward? And this first network actually live. And the best part of this live, this side, right side, is an amount of private innovation, VC-funded private innovators who are using these APIs to build, like Zerodha, Paytm, or PhonePays, all these companies who are in the Cred, and many of them who are building them, right? And this is why first time in India, we will change the GDP to lending ratio. First time we are able to do so, not because of the intent wasn't there, not because of regulatory support wasn't there. It was simply not cost viable to understand SME, underwrite 1 month bridge loan. It made no sense to the banks to do it. Cost was too high. First time India collapsed the cost. When you collapse the cost and combine identity, payment, data, and digital signature, Now SMEs can actually digitally verify, prove, underwrite, algorithmically underwrite lending. Now, whether we should do a lot of lending or not is a different problem to discuss, okay? Maybe that itself is not a good idea, bad idea. And of course, we did with health. Vikram talked about, I won't repeat it. Health is a big ABDM. It's a huge, big change. And I think we have no choice but to do it. And education as well. And this is another reason why I believe at Extra Foundation, where I'm the CTO, we are working with many of them. We put out diksha.gov.in, which was the infrastructure that is used by most of the states today. And this one is actually setting the digital access to education. Because we still think physical schools and teachers will be hard to improve. So you're digitally being given that, right? And we are also looking at something peculiarly unique. And not many people, other people around the world, including US, by the way, including right here in Princeton. There's some efforts going on. But this one is very wacko idea because we believe much of our economy, our microeconomy, and fragmented. That means Amazon does 8% of B2C, remember? 92% is outside. B2B is not done. Uber does whole of nation. Uber's number of per day transaction is less than Delhi Metro alone, every day. So our urban mobility is not at all solved, right? This mobility is not solved. Hospitality is not solved. Job discovery is not solved. Now with the energy transition and EV transition, again fragmented. Fragmentation creates asymmetry and cost structures in the system. That is not good thing. So we have to formalize it. Formalization has to happen through technological approach. But there's two ways to look at it. And this is the West versus India slight difference, okay? One way to look at it is let DoorDash do its job. Let Amazon do its job. Let Uber do its job. Let it continue to grow. What's called a platform thinking. Let the platform players, innovators, create their market and expand job market. LinkedIn, let them push for it more and more. India problem with what we are seeing is that even with this platform, India's exceptionally large size and diversity causes them to play in the sub 10% game. So it's actually not solving it. Or actually if it starts solving 50%, 60%, we have monopoly in hand. So either way we are screwed. Okay, so and we are saying we are thinking about differently. We are thinking about this. How did internet happen? We are inspired by the internet. Why internet was decentralized, economy on the internet was centralized. And we are saying that no, actually economic transactions can be decentralized as well. And that's the effort we are doing. First one we started, by the way, in Kochi, so the world's first peer-to-peer taxi booking with no intermediary. And then Bangalore, very popular thing called Nammayatri, it just blew out of proportion. Drivers love it. Fully digital, fully peer-to-peer, decentralized, nothing to do with government. Completely driven by driver unions and tech guys like us, okay? Open source tech guys. But government blessed it because anything good, why wouldn't I take credit? I would definitely. And then Amsterdam went live last week. Okay, so we have Brazil live, Gambia live, Amazon live, all on this open source. So this is actually kicking in. And we have this project right here in Princeton, which we are going to do. So this has, anyway, I'll skip this part. It's really well done in Bangalore. Just 1 year, okay, in Bangalore alone. And ONDC is the network. So if you have heard ONDC in India, this is what they're doing. It's an open network. It's an internet for commerce. It is not a server. It's not a software platform. They run nothing. They are not even in the middle of transaction. They cannot see the transaction. They cannot manipulate the transaction. They cannot store the transaction. It's peer-to-peer. But they're facilitating a grid that is peer-to-peer. And creating, why is it important to facilitate? You can't just have highways and no rules. You have to have highway and governance, so the consumer protection, SLA guarantees, dispute resolution, all the good stuff they get together, right? So this is what's happening. And this is another thing. Again, why India's private innovation is thriving on ONDC. There are many VC-funded efforts that are actually driving this innovation. It's not limited to commerce. We are doing energy trade on the same network. And this is what is actually going live in Europe, a couple of places as well. So this is very interesting stuff. I'm just giving you is that you heard, heard other, and sort of frozen time, and then you heard UPI a little bit, and India is doing way more than a lot of that, okay, in terms of setting. And we are also unleashed the, what we call the next barrier for computer-human interaction in India. 200 million people everybody can watch YouTube, but 200 million people at best can do English or manage the user interfaces as we imagine user interfaces. We believe voice is the next touch, and we have to crack that puzzle. SMEs should be able to say, yeah, pick up that, do it, accept my order, and things like that in my local language, and I should be able to interact. There's no reason why humans can't interact with computers in the natural sentences, and we have done this with IIT Madras. We have somebody from IIT Madras here, and we are funding this, again, open source. We are taking this to Africa this year with 30 languages. Okay. I'll stop there. Okay, this is where we were in 92, or pre-92. And I hate to say, it's a very bad setup. Government becoming an operator, not a regulator, not a facilitator, an operator. Bad setup. But if you outsource everything to private, you have another bad setup. You have trying to wake up. Markets Act in Europe, they're all response to tech, play. You can't everything be done. So the DPI thinking is somewhere in the middle. How can you do something minimum? Really enforce interoperability and portability, so that the playground is not locked in by one vendor or one player. The playground is open. Who will play? We don't know. Only good guys can play. But at least the playground should be open for everything we do. And that's the idea. And that means technology, minimum technology infrastructure, set up good governance, and absolutely important thing, public-private innovation. And that's an example of our startup, fintech startup ecosystem. And Satya Nadella beautifully said, India has a beautiful balance of private innovation on public rails. It's a good jugalbandi, as we call it, right? It's a good jazz combination. You play that out well and see where it goes. And this is no different. Our argument is no different from physical infrastructure. Why did you all do highways and railroads and parks and libraries? And because it creates equity and access and so on. Why were you not doing in digital? We were asking the same questions. We can do the same thing in digital. It makes total sense to create equitable infrastructure, not solutions. Let private players create solution, infrastructure, right? I think the biggest thing has been the expansion of the pie and the formalization and inclusion. 10x formalization into the system. Suddenly 500 million people can participate in the formal system, and that creates, this is the reason why our tax collection grew faster than GDP. Because when you formalize, a lot more ripple effects of that thing happens. From formalization, you can't argue formalization is a can't do. You have to do it. We have no choice. But I think tech played a brilliant play into that. Stop there. Thank you so much. Sorry, I had to hurry up. Yeah.
So thank you. That was just incredible. So thank you so much.
I hope so. Yeah.
We'll have. I think this also sort of explains remember the optimism, pessimism debate in the economic section. Maybe some of you are tilting towards optimism after hearing both of these talks. I'm going to invite Akash Kapoor, who many of you know. He's a well-known writer. He's also worked in the data space and in entrepreneurship, but right now he's a visiting lecturer teaching a class with Mihir Ksirsagar at our Center for Information Technology and Policy on digital infrastructure. So, some 5 minutes? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. As Anu said, I'm Akash Kapoor. I'm a visiting lecturer and scholar here. Visiting lecturer and scholar here, working on a research project and co-teaching a class on digital public infrastructure, which Dr. Verma visited yesterday. We had a great conversation with our students, learned a lot. Everybody enjoyed that, so thank you for that. I'm going to make this a brief comment on DPI and some of the stuff he just said, and as we discussed, I'm going to phrase this as a question, which may give you 2 minutes to respond to the question. I wanted to start, as a way of getting to my question, I wanted to point out that the aspect of DPI that tends to be most commented on and most noticed is its scale and ambition. This is the most impressive aspect of DPI in many ways. 1.4 billion digital identities issued, over half the world's financial transactions now passing through the Indian network. These are really impressive numbers and undeniably impressive. But one of the things that you referred to and that we've talked a lot about in our class is that along with this ambition, part of the reason, and a big part of the reason for the success of this, is a certain humility in the architecture and a certain humbleness in the way it was designed. The kind of foundational nature, the insistence on not going too far up the stack, the modular thinking, what we refer to as the Bangalore way of thinking, platform thinking, is really sort of key to the success alongside the ambition. And so what I've been thinking about, and the question I have for you is, going forward, as this becomes more and more successful and as it becomes more and more popular around the world, the challenge seems to be, how do we maintain that humility in thinking about it? How do we maintain that modular aspect, which is what has really made this so successful? And I know you're an optimist, but like academics they raise problems, they problematize, they raise concerns. But I think there's a danger that DPI in a way becomes a victim of its own success. There's so much enthusiasm surrounding this. Sometimes it reminds me of like the classic tech hype cycle. I feel like every week I see new applications, new platforms that are no longer really platforms anymore, but full-fledged services all the way up the stack, doing things that that you were so insistent on not doing at the beginning and going all the way up the stack. And so I guess partly this is a question about government and how this evolves as it moves away from the kind of Bangalore entrepreneurial circles into government. What happens as what has basically been a startup becomes formalized and institutionalized going forward? And just, to the extent this is a valid concern, I see it playing out in two possible ways. One is the familiar way, the concern that's often raised, which you can think of as the kind of big brother concern. This is something it's not invalid, but it's now a well-known sort of conversation about concerns over surveillance, over data privacy, over an overweening state that extends this technology into virtually every aspect of citizens' lives. But there's another one, which is where this happens by benign intent and almost by accident. Where the state, where government and other stakeholders don't really understand the fundamental modular nature of the technology, get so excited by it and sort of like more of a good thing, want to do more of a good thing, and you end up with essentially some kind of version of feature bloat, like that Microsoft Word paperclip. What's the digital version of that Microsoft Word paperclip that we used to go there? So the concern that the government fundamentally misunderstands why this was successful, tries to do too much with it. Both scenarios seem possible to me, possibly even plausible. And I guess my question to you would just be, what kinds of guardrails do you envision, both at a policy level, but also importantly at a technical level, to prevent that kind of mission creep and that feature bloat that could undermine what has made this so successful and so undeniably impressive?
Is that on? Okay, it's on. Yeah, so first of all, I don't think any one of us can claim that we will have control over the design of new things to come. And I explicitly remember a conversation with National Health Authority as part of the ABDM discussion, where they would, in the over-enthusiasm, wanting to attach Aadhaar to every record, and then we had to write, we were part of the advisory group, so we were literally bringing up right to anonymity when it comes to sexual diseases or things. You are right to be not seen. I mean, if you want to be seen, it's okay, but because you want care or whatever. But that's bilateral, between your doctor and you. Why should the system attach an identity, system-enforced identity? You can enforce your fungible identities, okay, if you were to say that word. So and interestingly, because we were involved, actually they course corrected. So in that paper, really ABDM said, yeah, that's an important point, and other than when the insurance was given, no other places we should be insisting on. For example, our PHR, personal healthcare records architecture, two things that we were dreading that would happen in the enthusiasm, that you would create an identity-attached PHR record all the time, which is not necessary, frankly, it's not even needed. Second, it would get centralized. Not because of somebody wanting to control, because that's a natural way to think platforms. Oh, I'll put up a database and I'll help you download your data. It's for your own good. Nothing malicious in the intent. But you end up designing what you've known patterns from the past, including tech guys. Tech guys would say, yeah, you put up a database and put your database product. Yeah, maybe people can download, give them a portal or a website to download there. We said, no. The idea that you can pool the healthcare record, create significant privacy and cybersecurity risk is a honeypot of 1 billion people's healthcare data going through a pipe, right? So we kept the PHR architecture of ABDM again. It's at this time, an architecture is not yet, seen through. It's completely decentralized. That means India's PHR data has 0 centralized nodes in the architecture. 0. It's between you and your counterparty. So very nicely, wherever you get to intervene, we tend to apply our thing, but I'm very sure there are like 50 other projects where many of us are not even participating, and digital enthusiasm continues. Digital everything, let's do digital, let's do, put some RFP, put a database, put an app, let's launch before the election, one more app. I don't know whether we should balance that between all of us, and when we see it, we should write about it, talk about it, and that brings everything else, the morning discussion about liberties of talking and all that thing, but keeping that aside, I see no other way. We can't get involved every time, and we won't get involved every time. So, but we are writing these exams as under CDPI, Center for DPI, we are actually writing these principles of thinking. Doesn't mean people will follow. I can't get Ethiopia to force them to think and force them to do it. Ethiopia will do what they need to do. But I think we can write it down. I think by writing it down, when you do research, academic research, I encourage all of you to write the good things about what really clicked for India. The minimalism, keeping it so simple that government actually succeeded. If you make it anything big, it would have collapsed on its own weight. So maybe we repeat this every time we get a chance. And when we repeat more and more, hopefully, people will say, okay, maybe I should do that way only, right? They can still mess it up. I'm very sure we'll mess it up. Okay? Technologies are notorious, we'll mess it up many times over. But, we write it down. I think it's a good thing way to do. So I encourage all of you to do the research as well. Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you.
And just to say, we have a lot of this conversation will come back. I see Sheila Jasanoff right over here. This connects with conversations tomorrow on science, technology, and governance. So lots to follow up on tomorrow. I'm going to invite Consul General of India at New York City, Binay Pradhan, to make a few remarks. And then if I can request folks to stay on, maybe we can take a photo, and then we'll proceed. We'll take a bit of a break while we take the photo, and then we'll proceed to the session on inclusion, where many of these questions will come back. We'll talk about health, healthcare, inclusion, digital infrastructure. But for now, it's my great pleasure to invite Consul General of India at New York City, Binay Pradhan, to make brief remarks to us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Anu Ramaswamy and Indiaspora for having invited me to speak to this august gathering. It's really a true pleasure to be with such well-known, distinguished thought leaders in this room. I've been here in this beautiful city of New York for about 3 months, have been to various states by now, have met people from different walks of life, have seen the different aspects of American society, have have been touched with the warm hospitality of both the American people and the Indian American community. And I, of course, feel enriched with these experiences, these exposures, and the perspectives that I have got over these last 3 months. And I look forward to this engagement and learning. So when I was speaking to Professor Anu and I asked her what exactly I should speak about, she asked me to speak on Indian diaspora. Now, that is a difficult topic because I'm not part of Indian diaspora, you all are. And I'm basically telling you your story and telling you our expectations from you. So it's very personal for you. So please bear with me for next 7-8 minutes on that. So like I said, here I am as part of Team India. working towards the very well-defined, what Professor Vikram Patel said, that we have now a very well-defined target of being a developed country by 2047. So all Indian embassies, including people like me, we all work for that well-defined objective of a developed India by 2047. And I am convinced that the India-US bilateral relationship has a very key role to play and contribute towards this objective. And I'm even more convinced that the Indian-American community has even more critical role to play towards that objective. So let me share you a story of IIT Madras Zanzibar campus. I know Professor Anu is related to both IIT Madras and the Zanzibar campus. I guess there are some other alumni from that place. So roughly a year and a half back, the discussion started. And it's a story about Indian-American community's success, not only which is resonating in this country or back home in India, but resonating in far-flung places in Africa. So, like I said, about 18 months back, when the discussion started, when the government decided decided that Indian premier institutes would go and set up campuses outside, and the Prime Minister decided that the first offshore IIT campus should be in the global south and preferably in Africa, we were engaging the governments there, and government of Tanzania actually volunteered to host IIT Madras campus. They were motivated by a particular documentary from BBC, which was about the United States importing IITians to this country, and leading to the story that the American technological and scientific development is primarily based upon the hard work of Indian-American community. So the leadership of that country, they felt that they can host an IIT and create the next generation of African leaders, technology leaders, and that would be probably a more direct way to bring development to that continent. So this is a real example of the success of Indian-American community, which resonates well in the global south, and I saw it firsthand myself in Tanzania working as Indian High Commissioner. Now, I think you would know that India not only is the most populous country, but our diaspora is also the biggest diaspora. And out of 35 million strong diaspora, 15% of the diaspora, which is the biggest segment, lives in this country, in the United States. And if you talk about the student diaspora, we have about 1.7 million student diaspora, and about 20% of that stays in this country. That's not only the biggest cohort of international students in this country, but this also happens to be the biggest chunk of Indian students in any one country outside India. So this number, this statistics is not only our strength, but it also provides opportunity. And it has already contributed to the growth of Indian growth story, besides contributing to the nation building of the United States. And I'm here, I thought I should spend 5-7 minutes with you to deliberate on how to accelerate this contribution and make it better, bolder, and robust. So coming to the Indian-US relationship, in a lighter way, I say that if you look at this relationship as a bouquet of flowers, the Indian-American community happens to be the most beautiful flower in that bouquet. And if President Biden refers to this partnership as one of the most consequential partnership of 21st century, Prime Minister Modi says that Indian-American community is the driver, the engine of that partnership. So that is the thrust, that is the importance we lay on the Indian-American community. Of course, the strong sense of giving back of this community is very well known. In India, we have got the benefit, like I said, in the growth story. We have seen several Indian-American community members promoting, supporting, leading organizations. They are making significant impact in different social sectors of India, whether it is Akshay Patra, Pratham, Ekal Vidyalaya, Deshpande Foundation, you name many of them who are making significant contributions. Many of them are technology-enabled solutions. And this community has linked Indian industry with not only the American industry, but with the global industry. And they have been ambassadors of technology collaborations. I spent a day last month at the MIT, hosted by Dean Ananta Chandrakesan. And I got to see how Indian scientific minds are linking Indian industry with the global industry in the area of semiconductor, AI, quantum, and the list goes on. And if you look at their contribution in terms of the American development, of course, that is very well known. You are all part of that. But we from India we see your success, as an inspiration. We give you example to our children, and we are very aware about your contribution and your leadership in the world of technology, healthcare, scientific community, industry, and also the fact that you have kept the Indian culture, Indian traditions intact in real ways. And we now see the emergence of Indian community in the political landscape, and we are really excited about that. And knowing that American mainstream is linked to American politics, we are really very happy about that. Having said that, the American community is unique, having unique capabilities, which probably no other Indian diaspora in other country has. Of course, the expectation happens to be bigger from this community. And I, as a Consul General, I'm here to serve the Indian community, so I'm kind of transgressing my jurisdiction when I lay down the expectations. But believe me, these are not my expectations, these are the expectations of common Indian people. And when I have traveled 8 states in my consular jurisdiction, these are the feedback I got from the common Indian American community members who live in this region. So like I said, the expectations are bigger. Let me kind of, summarize these expectations in 3 main brackets. The first is, like I think, what Professor Vikram Patel said about the success story of health sector in last 2 decades. I would say that story would be similar in other sectors as well. That the basic needs of so-called roti kapda makan, the basic needs of hunger, those things are, I think, pretty much met in India, thanks to the large social security programs, social sector programs by Government of India and various states. So if you ask common Indian what would they expect from this community, which is very unique, as I said, I would say they would expect you to touch their aspirations, not the needs. The needs are, you can question the quality, but I would say if one has to choose between the need and the aspiration, they would expect the Indian American technology leaders, the community leaders, the people who are present in this hall to touch the aspirations of Indian people and help them to understand the technological ground shifting that is happening, to help them to navigate these changes and enable them with knowledge tools and technology tools to exploit these changes to their advantage. The second expectation is regarding technology. I think what Mr. Pramod Burma mentioned, if I rephrase it in one sentence, he basically said that Indian people, irrespective of their education level, now know how to use technology. And when we say our objectives of either having a developed country by 2047 or having a energy independence by 2047 or net emission zero by 2070, I'm sure these all are going to be driven by technology. Now, this is a country where our diaspora, like I said, is uniquely endowed with technological leadership. I think that is a second area of expectation that people here, support on the technological front. I think what Mr. Pramod Verma mentioned, that you don't have to actually go there. Like the example he was giving, difference between verb and noun. I would say that pretty much applies here. People from here doesn't have to go back to India, but help through the technological tools. And the third and most important thing is institution building. I would say whether it is physical institution, whether it is technological and virtual institution, but where you can make a big impact is in building educational, skill development, health, and other institutions building, giving you ideas. What we are witnessing today here is very valuable in that direction. So that is the third expectation from people, both from India and the general Indian American community here. Besides, of course, these 3 main things, I come across feedback that people generally expect, the community to remain united in branding India in this country. People hope that, we become more active in political landscape here. We are generally expecting that the Indian community takes care of the Indian students. I'm sure you must be coming across different, Indian media stories about Indian student deaths here, which is very disturbing, very alarming. And the general expectation is that Indian community leaders here probably can handhold the Indian students. And the last expectation would be to take care of the needy Indian nationals, because not everybody is prosperous here among the Indian community. We have quite a few Indian organizations who are active there, the doctors group, the legal groups, the other people. Recently, I saw a good trend of Indian companies coming forward, offering internship to Indian students, offering pre-legal aid pre-medical support to the needy Indian people, but I think that is another set of expectations that I see from people. To conclude, I would say that I see India-US relationship at a point of inflection. I also see a resurgent India marching towards the very well-defined goal of developed India. And I clearly see the Indian-American community as a force to reckon with. And what we need to do together is to kind of, to refocus. And I am really very optimistic to see that the Indian-American community is increasingly determined to contribute towards India's growth story. So let me thank each one of you for your attention and listening to me. Thank you very much.